I did everything that I could in my power to stop this man from abusing and exploiting women. And today, that has happened. And people have seen him for who he is, not this mild-mannered guru, self-help leader. He's a vile monster, and he deserves to be behind bars.
I am going to follow the recommendation of the state in this case. The rape, he'll be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
Number 1. Anna Young. 3 years ago, the notorious cult leader Anna Young died just 42 days into her 30-year prison sentence. She led the House of Prayers cult in Alachua County, where she committed heinous crimes that eventually led to her conviction in 2021 for the second-degree murder of a toddler, Iman Harper, and the manslaughter of a 3-year-old, Katonia Jackson. In 1989, Iman Harper was starved and beaten to death, and his body was tragically never found. Katonia Jackson, who suffered from multiple seizures, was locked in a closet and deprived of her medication, leading to her death in 1983. Her family believes her seizures were caused by the abuse and malnutrition inflicted by the cult. These dark secrets remained hidden until Anna Young's own daughter, Joy Fluker, courageously reported her suspicions to the Alachua County Sheriff's deputies. This led to an investigation into the cult's activities, resulting in Young's conviction. She was sentenced to 30 years for Harper's murder and 15 years for Jackson's manslaughter, with the sentences to be served concurrently. At 79, she was finally held accountable for her crimes. But how did Anna Young die? Just 42 days into her sentence on March 31, 2021, she passed away in state custody. Serving time at the Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala, it's believed she contracted COVID-19, leading to her death. The House of Prayer, founded by Young in the 1980s, was initially portrayed as a safe haven for people who had committed wrongdoings, according to her daughter, Joy. Members, including children, attended her religious boarding school and idolized Mother Anna, seeing her as the voice of God. This blind devotion led them to endure extreme punishments, including beatings, whippings, starvation, and being locked in boxes. The power she wielded over her followers corrupted her, turning what was supposed to be a place of redemption into a house of horrors. But you must wonder, how did Anna Young get caught? In 1992, the dark secrets of the House of Prayer started to unravel. Anna Young faced child abuse charges involving a 12-year-old girl named Nikki Nicholson. Young's punishment for what she called improper hygiene was horrifying. Nikki was held down in a metal tub filled with chemicals and scalding water while Young scrubbed her. Art Forgy from the Alachua County Sheriff's Office mentioned that Young believed these brutal tactics would exonerate the devil from people. This incident forced Young to go on the run, and she evaded capture for nearly a decade, even landing on the FBI's most wanted list. In 2001, her luck ran out. She was recognized and turned in while living in an attic with relatives in Chicago. After being extradited to Alachua County, she served only 192 days in jail and then walked free for the next 16 years. The real twist in the story came in 2016, when Anna Young's own daughter, Joy Fluker, made a life-changing decision. Joy called the Alachua County Sheriff's Office, revealing the chilling details of her mother's crimes. She remembered the horrors and courageously told the authorities, triggering an investigation into the murder of Iman Harper and subsequently uncovering the death of Katonia Jackson. It took a lot of courage from a lot of different people to come forward and bring this to light, Forgy said. Anna Young's arrest in December 2017 directly resulted from Joy's brave testimony. Joy revealed that she knew Harper had died from the regular beatings and starvation inflicted by her mother. She agonized over her decision, telling police, "How can I snitch on my mom? I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Like, is this something that a family is never supposed to tell?" After Young's arrest, former members of the House of Prayer began to share their own stories of torture and abuse. They described a cult atmosphere filled with exorcisms and chemical baths. Survivors, including Joy, spoke out about their traumatic experiences growing up in the cult and accused Young of more deaths within the compound. John Neal, whose sister Katonia Jackson died of a seizure, said, "She tortured my little sister, treated her like an animal." Neal himself bears scars from the violent beatings he received at Young's hands, sometimes in front of his own mother, for minor infractions like being falsely accused of taking candy. During Young's sentencing hearing, Neal described his sister as exceptional and beautiful. After the judge handed down the sentences, 30 years for Harper's murder and 15 years for Jackson's manslaughter, Neal expressed his relief. "I feel like we got justice, 100%. I often wondered if I would ever get justice or any accountability. I know God holds people accountable. I knew that was coming. But to be able to see it and live it, it's just wonderful. It's a blessing." Number 2. Eligio Bishop.
I am going to follow the recommendation of the state in this case. On the rape, he'll be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, followed by 10 years consecutive for the false imprisonment.
Now let's dive into the shocking story of Eligio Bishop, better known as Nature Boy or Three God. This 40-year-old alleged cult leader of the Carbon Nation group was sentenced to life without parole plus an additional 10 years after being found guilty of rape and other charges. His arrest in April 2022 led to a grand jury indicting him on 5 charges, including rape, in July 2022. Bishop's case is especially disturbing. He was accused of raping a former cult member who was trying to escape and then posting explicit content online. The trial shed light on the sinister practices of the cult, which used social media to promote its so-called holistic lifestyle and teachings. During the sentencing hearing, emotional testimonies from former cult members revealed the psychological torment Bishop inflicted. One woman's chilling statement, "He said my soul belonged to him, and there was absolutely no saying no to him," highlighted the coercive control he exercised over his followers. Throughout the hearing, Bishop displayed a shocking lack of remorse. He casually chatted with the bailiff and showed no signs of guilt, prompting DeKalb County Superior Court Judge Stacey Heydrich to scold him. When Bishop tried to engage with the judge and the victims, his comments were met with silence, underscoring the severity of his crimes. In a moment of audacity, Bishop asked the judge, "Are you happy?" Judge Heydrich curtly replied, "I'm not answering any questions of yours." Bishop, unrepentant, then declared, I forgive you," attempting to address the judge. Unmoved, Judge Heydrich labeled him as a master manipulator and a classic narcissist.
"I forgive you. I want you to know I still love you and forgive you. And kiss my baby girl and let her know I love her. And I love y'all."
Prosecutors argued for the maximum sentence, pointing to Bishop's total lack of remorse throughout the trial. Despite the defense's plea for leniency due to his troubled childhood, Judge Heydrich handed down a life sentence without parole, plus a consecutive 10-year sentence for his additional crimes. Among these was the charge of revenge porn. One former member, identifying herself as his girlfriend, testified that Bishop posted explicit videos of them without her consent after she left him. Police reports confirmed that she had joined the sex cult led by Bishop and that he had shared these videos on X. Furthermore, Bishop's wife and former cult member told 11 Alive that he had sexually and emotionally abused members, adding more weight to the already damning case against him. Number 3. Jeffrey Don Lundgren. Let's rewind to 1937, when Mormon church prophet Joseph Smith was driven out of Kirtland, Ohio. Legend has it that he cursed the town on his way out. Fast forward to 1989, and Kirtland saw one of its darkest moments: the brutal murders of Dennis and Cheryl Avery and their 3 daughters by cult leader Jeffrey Lundgren and his followers. Jeffrey Lundgren, who claimed to be a prophet, asked his followers to support him financially. His teachings attracted a group including disaffected members of the RLDS Church. By 1987, Lundgren and his followers had rented a large farmhouse where they lived communally. Lundgren's followers called him Dad and handed over their paychecks to fund the group's expenses. Among Lundgren's followers was the Avery family: 49-year-old Dennis, his wife Cheryl, and their 3 daughters, Trina, Rebecca, and 7-year-old Karen. Unlike other members, the Averys lived on their own and kept some proceeds from selling their Missouri home, which Lundgren saw as sinful. Despite their devotion, Lundgren disliked Dennis, thought Cheryl was too independent, and found the Avery children disobedient. In 1988, Lundgren was excommunicated from the RLDS Church. His sermons became increasingly paranoid and apocalyptic. He talked about the end of days and insisted the men in his group train with firearms, all while he donned military fatigues. Lundgren planned to take over the Kirtland Temple by force on his 38th birthday, but a disaffected member tipped off the police, causing him to call off the attack. By early 1989, Lundgren claimed the only way to reach Zion was by selling off worldly possessions and retreating into the wilderness. The Averys, like others, began preparing to follow him. Little did they know that Lundgren had marked them for death as a blood sacrifice to reach the Promised Land. On April 17, 1989, the Averys were invited to the farmhouse. They were led one by one to a barn, bound, gagged, and shot in a 6-by-7-foot pit. Lundgren's 19-year-old son Damon, along with group members Ronald Luff, Daniel Kraft, Richard Brand, and Greg Winship, assisted in the murders. The day after the murders, police and FBI agents arrived at Lundgren's farm, responding to complaints about cult activities. Unaware they were walking over the Averys' graves, they left after speaking to group members. Lundgren then fled with his followers, first to a campsite in West Virginia and then to Missouri. In December 1989, disgruntled cult member Larry Keith Johnson went to authorities in Kansas City, Missouri. Angry that Lundgren had chosen his wife Catherine as a second wife, Johnson spilled the details of the Avery murders, even drawing a map of the burial site. The Avery bodies were discovered in January 1990, sparking a nationwide manhunt. Lundgren was caught on January 7, 1990, near the Mexican border. He and his wife Alice had planned to flee with their son Damon and other group members. At the time of their arrest, police found an arsenal of weapons and survival gear. Besides Lundgren, 10 other cult members faced charges related to the Avery murders. Most pled guilty and cooperated for lighter sentences. In August 1990, Lundgren went on trial. He remained unrepentant, declaring to the jury, "I am a prophet of God." The jury found him guilty of 5 counts, each of aggravated murder and kidnapping. He was sentenced to death. Lundgren's wife Alice and son Damon also received life sentences, as did Ronald Luff and Daniel Kraft. Richard Brand and Greg Winship, along with other cult members, were paroled after nearly 20 years in prison. Katherine Johnson, sentenced to a year for obstruction, was released in 1991. After exhausting all appeals, Jeffrey Lundgren was executed by lethal injection on October 24, 2006. In his final statement, he professed love for God, his family, and his second wife, Kathy, closing a grim chapter in Kirtland's history. Number 4. Larry Ray.
I was so scared. He wouldn't let me sleep. He controlled what I was eating. He would yell at me. He would beat me. He took away everything that made me me.
Imagine the horror of discovering that a seemingly caring parent has actually been orchestrating a decade-long nightmare. That is the chilling tale of Lawrence Larry Ray. His sinister actions at Sarah Lawrence College have been exposed in journalistic reports, documentaries, and now a Lifetime movie. Devil on Campus, the Larry Ray story, starring Billy Zane, which aired on June 23rd, dives deep into Ray's destructive influence on the students at the college. It all began in 2010, when Larry Ray moved into his daughter's dorm room at Sarah Lawrence College. It seemed innocent enough, but what followed was anything but. Ray ingratiated himself with his daughter's friends and roommates, posing as a father figure while manipulating and abusing them for nearly a decade. The chilling details were first brought to light in a 2019 article by The Cut, The Stolen Kids of Sarah Lawrence. In 2020, the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York dropped the hammer, charging Ray with a slew of crimes, including extortion, sex trafficking, and forced labor. By 2022, Ray was convicted on all counts. U.S. Attorney Damian Williams didn't mince words. Larry Ray is a predator, an evil man who did evil things. Today's verdict finally brings him to justice. Ray's modus operandi was insidious. After moving into his daughter's dorm, he began conducting so-called therapy sessions. During these sessions, he learned intimate details about the students' lives and mental health struggles, gaining their trust. Once he had them under his spell, he used sleep deprivation, psychological and sexual humiliation, verbal abuse, and threats of violence to control them. He even physically assaulted some, including grabbing a male victim by the throat until he passed out. In 2011, some of Ray's daughter's roommates moved into a one-bedroom apartment in New York City with him. Here, Ray's web of manipulation expanded as he introduced more victims to his cruel methods. Over nearly a decade, Ray forced at least 5 students to give him around $1 million, which he then laundered. He also subjected one female victim to sex trafficking and made her, along with 2 other victims, work without pay on a family member's property in North Carolina. Fast forward to 2023, and justice caught up with Larry Ray. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison, with Manhattan Federal Court Judge Louis J. Lehman describing his crimes as particularly heinous. U.S. Attorney Williams summed it up perfectly. For years, he inflicted brutal and lifelong harm on innocent victims. He groomed them and abused them into submission for his own gain. So where is Larry Ray now? At 64, Ray is serving his time at the U.S. Penitentiary McCreary in Pine Knot, Kentucky. His release date? Mark your calendars for March 29, 2071. Though it's safe to say he won't be walking free anytime soon. Number 5. Warren Jeffs.
Are you Warren Jeffs? Yes. All right, Mr. Jeffs, you're being held as a fugitive, and there are 2 fugitive holds for you, one from Utah, one from Arizona.
Let's talk about Warren Steed Jeffs, an infamous name in the world of cult leaders. He's currently serving a life sentence in Texas for child sexual assault following his 2011 convictions. Jeffs is the president of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or FLDS, a polygamous sect based in Arizona. The FLDS broke away from the mainstream Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS, in the early 20th century when its founders refused to abandon polygamy. It's important to note that there is no affiliation between the FLDS and the LDS Church. In 2006, Jeffs landed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. His crime? Arranging illegal child marriages between his adult male followers and underage girls in Utah. Things only got worse for him in 2007 when Arizona hit him with 8 more charges, including incest and sexual conduct with minors. September 2007 marked a significant point in Jeff's legal battles. He was convicted of 2 counts of rape as an accomplice in Utah and sentenced to 10 years to life in prison. However, this conviction didn't stick. In 2010, the Utah Supreme Court overturned it due to flawed jury instructions. But Jeffs couldn't escape justice for long. He was extradited to Texas, where he faced even graver charges. Jeffs was found guilty of sexually assaulting a minor, specifically for raping a 15-year-old child bride, and aggravated sexual assault against a child for raping a 12-year-old child bride. These horrific crimes earned him a life sentence, plus an additional 20 years and a $10,000 fine. Today, Warren Jeffs is incarcerated at the Lewis C. Powledge Unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice near Palestine, Texas. Number 6. Micah Moore.
When you've got police looking for somebody that committed a crime, particularly a really heinous crime, there's pressure on them to make an arrest, obviously. And when you have somebody confessing to that, I mean, normally you're going to think, well, yeah, he confessed to it. Why would somebody say they did something so terrible if they didn't really do it?
Imagine confessing to a murder you didn't commit because you were under the influence of what you believed was a demonic exorcism. That's the wild story of Micah Moore, a Kansas City man who admitted to killing Bethany Deaton, the 27-year-old wife of his prayer group leader, only to recant his confession later. Moore, then 25, claimed he wasn't in his right mind when he confessed in November 2012. Here's the backstory. Moore initially told investigators that Tyler Deaton, the leader of their prayer group, ordered him to kill Bethany to keep her from revealing the group's dark secrets. These secrets included Deaton's sexual relations with other male members. Bethany's body was found in her locked minivan at Longview Lake on October 30th, 2012, with a loosely tied bag over her head, a suicide note, and an empty acetaminophen bottle nearby. The Jackson County coroner first ruled her death as suicide. However, Moore's attorneys argued that aside from his confession, there was no evidence of a crime. Bethany's body was sent back to Kansas City from Texas for an autopsy, and the cause of death was changed to undetermined. Moore and Deaton were part of a 20-member prayer group that moved to Kansas City from Texas to join the International House of Prayer University, an evangelical Christian organization. They lived communally in Grandview, where Deaton controlled every aspect of their lives, from their free time to their worship schedules. After Bethany's death, IHOP held a meeting to help group members process their grief. IHOP spokesperson Nick Syrett insisted that this was not an exorcism meeting, contrary to Moore's claims. Moore's attorneys painted a picture of Bethany as a deeply troubled woman whose rejection by her husband and shunning by the group drove her to suicide. During a prayer session on November 8, 2012, an IHOP-affiliated group called Prisoners of Hope led a fervent meeting involving shouting at demons and praying in tongues. This intense session led Moore to confess to 2 IHOP leaders, who then took him to a local police station. Moore was charged with first-degree murder on November 9, 2012. Moore's attorneys later argued that his confession was made under extreme psychological pressure and that no actual evidence of a crime existed. Tyler Deaton, whom Moore initially accused of ordering the murder, was not charged with any involvement in his wife's death. At the time of his arrest, Moore was 23 and pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. Despite his confession, the evidence pointed to the possibility that Bethany's death might have been a suicide, given the empty pill bottle, the bag over her head, and the suicide note. After Moore's arrest, it emerged that Tyler Deaton was involved in sexual affairs with at least 3 other men in the religious community. This charismatic leader had a powerful influence over his followers, creating a complex web of relationships and control. Micah Moore is currently free on a $250,000 bond, but his story serves as a stark reminder of how psychological manipulation and extreme religious beliefs can lead to devastating outcomes. Number 7. Victor Bernard.
I didn't know it was wrong criminally, or like that what he was doing was raping me.
Let's talk about Victor Bernard, a cult leader whose story is as twisted as it is tragic. Bernard returned to a Pine County, Minnesota courtroom in 2018 for resentencing after winning an appeal that challenged his original 30-year prison term. Back in October 2016, Bernard had shocked everyone by unexpectedly pleading guilty to sexually molesting 2 of his teenage followers. Initially, Bernard was charged with a whopping 59 counts of criminal sexual conduct. However, he pleaded guilty to just 2 counts, which came with a presumptive sentence of 24 years in prison. The 30-year sentence he received was an upward departure from the plea deal agreed upon by both prosecutors and Bernard's defense. This departure was later thrown out on appeal due to a judicial technicality. The court hadn't provided its reasons for the longer sentence at the original sentencing. Bernard's attorney, David Risk of the Minneapolis firm Halberg Criminal Defense, explained that Bernard wanted to avoid a trial to spare everyone involved. Fundamentally, Mr. Bernard wanted to spare everyone, especially the girls involved, but the families and the community. He wanted to spare them a trial that likely would have been a very ugly, drawn-out trial with a lot of significant litigation, Risk said. His dark deeds came to light through a Fox 9 investigation in 2014. The investigation revealed that Bernard had sexually abused 2 of his followers, members of a group known as the Maidens. This group consisted of 10 firstborn daughters who were essentially groomed to serve Bernard. The expose led to the reopening of the investigation against Bernard, resulting in a 59-count indictment, an international manhunt, and his eventual extradition back to Minnesota. At his resentencing, Judge Krista Martin not only reaffirmed Bernard's prison term, but also made preliminary findings for civil commitment. This means that if Bernard survives his prison term, he will likely remain in a secure facility. The judge also slapped Bernard with a $12,000 fine for each count, totaling $24,000, to ensure he doesn't profit from his story through book deals or other means. By law, 70% of any fine collected goes to a local victim advocacy program. For his own safety, Bernard is serving his prison sentence out of state. Sources told Fox 9 that he was moved to a prison outside of Minnesota after an inmate at the Rush City, Minnesota prison allegedly assaulted him, claiming he was doing God's work. Number 8. Tony Alamo. Imprisoned evangelist Tony Alamo, whose real name was Bernie Lazar Hoffman, passed away in 2017 at the age of 82, over 7 years after receiving a 175-year prison sentence in Arkansas. The Bureau of Prisons announced his death, which occurred at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina. While the specific cause of his death wasn't immediately disclosed, Alamo had a history of health issues, including diabetes and a heart attack in 2011. Alamo's conviction in 2009 stemmed from 10 counts of transporting young girls across state lines for sex. Some of these victims, as young as 8, were forced to become his wives. He originally launched his ministry in Los Angeles before relocating its headquarters to Arkansas. Interestingly, Alamo was once known for designing flashy jackets for celebrities like Michael Jackson and Elvis Presley. His preaching began in the 1960s on California streets, where he spread a mix of anti-Catholic and apocalyptic messages. He controversially claimed divine approval for polygamy, viewed gays as satanic tools, and believed girls were ready for marriage at puberty. In a 2008 interview with the Associated Press, Alamo defended his stance on marriage during the same weekend state and federal agents raided his Arkansas ministry in a child abuse and pornography investigation. Witnesses at his trial described how Alamo controlled every aspect of his followers' lives, from marriage to education, clothing, and food. They testified that he began taking multiple wives in the early 1990s, including a 15-year-old in 1994, eventually marrying increasingly younger girls. 5 women testified they were married to him as minors, with one being only 8 years old when the ceremonies took place. Alamo's behavior reportedly became more erratic after his wife Susan died of cancer in 1982. His followers kept her body in a room at the ministry, praying for her resurrection for months. Her body was eventually buried on the ministry's property, but in 1991, Alamo ordered it removed before federal marshals could seize the property due to a court judgment. Authorities later found her crypt smashed open and her coffin missing, though Alamo returned her remains 7 years later under the threat of jail time. In addition to his criminal conviction, Alamo faced a federal civil trial and was ordered to pay $30 million to 2 men who grew up in his controversial ministry. Number 9. Lou Castro. Let's delve into the chilling story of Daniel Perez, a man who led a life of deceit, manipulation, and horror under the alias Lou Castro. For over 20 years, Perez, a murderer, child rapist, con man, and commune leader, moved from state to state, preying on vulnerable individuals to satisfy his twisted desires. Just before his capture, Perez relocated to Columbia, Tennessee from Wichita, Kansas in April 2009. He settled in a 2-story home just outside the city limits with his fiancée, her child, and another teenager. Perez hoped to continue his sinister activities in Maury County, but he was soon arrested for bank identification and Social Security fraud, leading to a 2-year prison sentence. Law enforcement in Wichita had been tracking Perez but lost sight of him until he was caught on surveillance video opening a fraudulent bank account in Colombia under the alias Joe Venegas. Before this, he had lived on a 20-acre property in Kansas known as Angel's Landing, posing as Lou Castro. He even purchased a $400,000 home on Indian Camp Springs Road outside Columbia, putting it in the name of two associates. Perez's true identity came to light a year later. He was Daniel Perez, a convicted sex offender who'd been presumed dead after disappearing in the 1990s. His elaborate web of lies and deceit was exposed on an episode of Dateline NBC, which aired on May 1, 2014, revealing how Perez preyed on children and commune members in Texas, South Dakota, and Kansas. Thanks to the persistent efforts of a Wichita detective and the FBI, Perez's reign of terror was finally coming to an end. Perez had a horrifying method for funding his lavish lifestyle. Whenever he ran low on money, he would predict the accidental death of a commune member, resulting in insurance payouts totaling $4.2 million. This money funded his insatiable thirst for violence and control. Investigators linked Perez to 6 accidental deaths that benefited his commune financially. Perez convinced his followers that he had magical powers. He met Jennifer Hudson, a Wichita real estate agent, who allowed her 2 young daughters to live with him. Tragically, Hudson died in 2008 in a car crash. One of her daughters moved to Columbia with Perez, while the other stayed in Wichita. After Perez's arrest, the girls revealed the grim details of their life with him, including the murder of 26-year-old Patricia Hughes in 2003. Hughes, a wife and a mother, was one of Perez's followers, and her death, initially ruled an accident, was later revealed to be a murder. Although Perez was charged with Hughes' murder, 5 other commune members with hefty insurance payouts also died under suspicious circumstances. These include a 2001 plane crash in South Dakota that killed Mona Griffith, her boyfriend, and her 12-year-old daughter, and Brian Hughes, Patricia's husband, who died in 2006 when a carjack failed. Upon completing his sentence for ID fraud, Perez was arrested on 28 counts of first-degree murder, child exploitation, multiple sex crimes, and fraud charges. Hudson's daughters testified against Perez in court, detailing the abuse they suffered. One daughter testified that Perez raped her hundreds of times and ordered her to videotape an 8-year-old girl in the bathroom. These tapes were found in Perez's Columbia home during his arrest. In February, Perez, now 55, was found guilty on all 28 charges, including first-degree murder, rape, aggravated criminal sodomy, aggravated assault, sexual exploitation of a child, and making false information. Judge Joseph Berbiesca sentenced Perez to 2 life sentences, plus 406 months on lesser charges, with no possibility of parole for 80 years. The Dateline NBC episode highlighted the national interest in this horrific case. Witnesses testified about the deaths of Perez's followers and the insurance payment that funded his extravagant lifestyle. Sedgwick County Sheriff's Deputy Ron Goodwin aptly described Perez. He's a sexual predator who's willing to do anything to live his life as he wants to live. He will stop at nothing, including murder and rape, and didn't stop at anything to get what he wanted. Thanks to the relentless efforts of investigators, Perez was finally put behind bars, preventing him from continuing his reign of terror in Columbia. The home Perez and his commune bought in Columbia sold in January 2012 for $385,000. Those involved in the sale had no idea about its notorious history. It was a close call for Columbia, a dangerous brush with a man who will now spend the rest of his life in prison. Number 10. Keith Rainier.
This is the finale for him. His victimization of people, his terrorizing people, it really is over. 120 years, right? So when I got over my shock, I was like, yeah, okay, he can't come for me now.
So one would say authenticity is being as you are.
Let's talk about Keith Rainier, the ex-leader of an upstate New York cult who branded women as sex slaves and recently lost his 4th attempt at a new trial. Rainier's motion claimed federal agents framed him for child pornography, but a federal judge denied it. Rainier was the mastermind behind NXIVM, pronounced Nexium, a supposed self-help group that was exposed in 2018 for operating a secret inner sex ring called DOS, or the Vow. Women in the cult were coerced into having sex with Rainier and were branded with his initials, as revealed during a 6-week trial. Witnesses detailed extensive sexual abuse, control, and manipulation at his hands. In 2019, Rainier was sentenced to 120 years in prison after being convicted on all 7 counts, including sex trafficking, forced labor, and wire fraud. The fraud charge alone covered 11 racketeering acts, such as the creation and possession of child pornography, conspiracy to commit identity theft, and extortion. In his latest motion for a new trial, Rainier argued that prosecutors fabricated metadata linked to nude photos of a 15-year-old DOS member named Camila from 2005. He claimed that the government tampered with the evidence and planted it on his computer. However, U.S. District Judge Nicholas Garalfis ruled against him, stating that Rainier had been aware of the metadata evidence before and during the trial and had the opportunity to challenge it. Judge Garalfis pointed out that Rainier's request for a new trial was an attempt to challenge evidence he had already had the chance to contest. The judge also noted that the government had offered to delay the trial so Rainier could review additional evidence related to his child pornography and exploitation charges. Rainier's attorney, Joseph Tully, disagreed with the judge's ruling, claiming the defense team provided sufficient evidence of government tampering. Tully argued that the decision allows prosecutors or corrupt agents to use AI to fabricate digital evidence and mislabel it, making it nearly impossible for the defense to catch the tampering before the trial ends. The Second Circuit also rejected Rainier's previous appeal to overturn his conviction. U.S. Circuit Judge Jose A. Cabranes stated in a 2022 decision that the statute for commercial sex acts does not require a monetary or financial component for the thing of value given or received, rejecting Rainier's argument. But what is it about certain individuals that makes them so susceptible to cults? Could it happen to anyone, or are there specific traits that make someone more vulnerable? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more gripping stories.